So stay with me, guys. This is a live talk for the Hoosier Herp Society in Indianapolis. I can't tell you how much I appreciated these folks for letting me come talk. They were just more kindly than I could imagine. Thank you to the Hoosier Herp Society. I really appreciated that so much. And I hope that they got a lot out of it. It seemed like they did. Got a few compliments. It's very nice to see. Nobody stopped me at the end. So that's why it goes for an hour and a half. It was only supposed to be like a 45-minute talk, and I can cut it down to 45 minutes. But they just kind of let me go because nobody stopped me. Nobody was walking out. It was just such a fascinating talk. Thank you so much. But this had to be re-recorded on somebody's phone because I forgot to push. I didn't realize I had to push go live. I hadn't used StreamYard in a very long time. So that's what happened here because I had it scheduled. I had it ready. I had StreamYard up. I had it set up to where you could see me most of the time as well as the actual presentation, not just what was on screen like the phone. So I had to have the president send me the deal, and he had to do it over Facebook, and it wouldn't post right, and then so it was just a nightmare to get this film. But I want people to enjoy it. I want you to listen to it and take in what I say. But the interesting thing is this is longer, and I think a better talk than my original talk, which I will link. Hopefully I can put it on screen, and if I can, it'll be in one of the corners. Remember, the people that heard this talk twice already were like, this is like, a lot of them were like, this is better the second time. And the second time they heard the talk, most of them, it was actually, I was so super tired and just wore out from work for months on end. And walking the animals and taking care of the animals and working overtime and just being so tired, and then having other struggles on top of that, that I was talking so fast, I wasn't there as much. This I slowed down, we were like that. So this is a better talk than my second one, but they actually still liked my second talk better than my original first talk that is live on this channel. So here's the thing. I think what this is so complicated. I've got a couple of really nice compliments. I took a very complex topic and made it dissectable, made it digestible. So therefore, I think we should do that. Like, I think if you want to just go through this video to kind of see what I'm talking about for the first time, and you have no intention of like really diving into this topic deep and having a better understanding of your animals in a deeper manner, then I would suggest watching this video right here, this hour and 12. But if you want to truly dive in deep, what you probably should do, my recommendation, if you want to understand this on a level that, like, really understand this, go watch my first video. It's about 40 minutes long. Presentation, it's good. Then I want you to take a couple days, a week, a month, whatever, but then come back to this video and watch this video after your mind has had time to sit with the ideas in that video. And so when you hear these now, you're, instead of you've had, your brain's like, okay. Oh, that's what that's probably what's going through your mind. And so that's what I want you to sit with. If you want to really learn and enjoy and just take this to the next level, this is what I'm suggesting. To go ahead and watch the first one and then come back later and watch the second one. Otherwise, watch this one over the other one. This one has more stuff to it. I think I slowed down quite a bit more because I had no idea how long that other one was going to take. You have no idea who's going to interrupt you or whatnot, which I'm cool with. So let me know how you guys think. Let me know what you feel is right or wrong. Okay, just slather the comments, man. Go for it.
I studied a couple of different types of brain stuff with humans. I studied the neuroscience of empathy, the neuroscience of blind sight, neuroscience of autism. So as soon as I saw my first reptile brain, I was like, oh, this makes sense. Like, this is... So, sorry, that does that. The gaming hub should go away. I don't know why it's not going away. I apologize. I'm trying to... Guess it's not going to do it. Why is it not? Come on. Are you guys okay with that being there?
Sure. Oh, yeah, that's good.
I apologize. So, yeah, still. All right, guys. So, we have different, this is a 3D model of an MRI of a bearded dragon. So we're going to focus on here. We're going to start with that light blue, the actual thing that sticks out from the brain is the OL stalk. It deals with your taste, your sensory organs, such as smell and stuff. So it's about 1% in a human's brain. It's about 10 to plus 30 in reptiles. Then we go down to the red here. That's their forebrain. There's a whole other word for it here. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. We're just going to call it the forebrain. And that deals with your nervous systems, your imagination, your memories, your decision making comes out of this. So in humans, I usually have a brain model. I forgot my brain. Well, I didn't forget it. I lost my brain. So I lost that little model. But the part of your brain that wrinkles on the outside is the forebrain. So then we move down, and you have the orange is the thalamus. This is what connects all the pieces of the brains together, basically. And then below that is the purple. That is the optic nerve. That's how they get that 360 view, is by actually having their nerve in the actual below their brains instead of in the back of their eyes. And so then we go up past the thalamus again to the dark green, and that is the optic tactile. That is auditory and sight, and basically instinctual thinking is happening. And then we go down to the yellow is your medulla. And the medulla is the connection between the spines. It has a lot of the hormones. It deals with automatic functions such as blinking and your heartbeat and your blood flow and just all sorts of different stuff there. The green, lime green there is it is the cerebellum. It deals with motor functions, it deals with your muscle movements. And so if I throw a ball and you don't catch it, and then I throw a ball again and you catch it, that's your cerebellum kicking in to change your reflexes. So this is not a Langolier like Stephen King wrote. This is our greatest ancestors with the actual vertebrates. All vertebrates come from this source. I think Stephen King was tapping into something. Yeah, it's pretty freaky, isn't it? So we look at a shark's brain, and we actually see a linear pattern, such as we see in reptiles. Whereas a whale, we see the actual spherical, like we see in humans. So we can actually have a very interesting talk when we think about sharks. How many here have been food bit by your reptile? Think about sharks biting people. It's just a food bite. It's the linear brain almost seems to have a more singular thinking, whereas the spherical brain seems to have, so think of it like the light lamp where you touch it and all the lightning bolts go off. That's a spherical brain going on. All that information can travel back and forth and just sporadic, like what that is. So we really get a lot of connections that reptiles don't because of their spherical brain. And later on we'll understand why that's probably best for them to not have all those connections going on. Because it does lead to a single-mindedness. It's actually probably better for them. So this was a study done by they took frogs, and when they talk about locomotor functions in any paper, they're talking about taking the sizes of the brain, the shapes of the brain, and trying to correlate that with the actual behavior. Terrestrial, do they swim? Are they arboreal? Do they bury themselves? Do they fly? Do they, different parts of it? So I took this study and I broke it down to every single thing they talked about in it. And then we have, is it similar to a human's brain? Every one of these frogs' brains are similar to a human's brain. Not identical, but similar. Like if you looked up what they were talking about there, you can find that in a human's brain. Because they're vertebrates. So I like to talk about something called blind sight. This is really helpful in understanding just about everything in a vertebrate's brain. So blind sight is when your eyes work and your cerebral cortex doesn't. And as we see from the picture, that information still travels. So they were still able to see what was beside them. They still smiled when they saw somebody else smile. These information is still being given to the brain before the cerebral cortex gets it. So what you're seeing is that these pathways are not just what we're taught in elementary school. Oh, well, the eye just goes back to the cerebral cortex. No, it actually has to travel. Always remember that that information is not magic. It doesn't just magically appear in the back of your brain. It actually has to travel. And we actually see it cross threads as well. So this is why I like to teach blind sight. It really shows you that this is traveling. And there's information being dropped off, not just in the cerebral cortex. So I came up with this graph. This is really a very interesting graph. People said this really helped them out to understand. So, information that's coming in, sight and sound are going to end up with the optic tactum, but we can see that the medulla sends a signal to the cerebellum sends a signal back. We have the optic tactum goes to the thalamus and the medulla, and that goes to the thalamus, goes to the optic tactum and the forebrain. The forebrain does not attach straight to the optic tactum. It actually has to travel between the two through that thalamus. And then we have the OL stop goes straight to the forebrain. So this really helps people kind of grasp how that information is traveling in the brain instead of the spherical nature of a human's brain. So this is my bearded dragon Calm Fancy sees Hydra over here in this lower tank. And so we can click it to about 30 seconds in. See, he hasn't started. After 30 seconds, he starts head bobbing. And it takes like almost a full minute for him to go full Blackbeard. Yeah, see, it's not full Blackbeard. So what I'm showing here is that they have a delay in decision making. Think about when we were talking about this slide. So if sight comes in and it has to be dissected by the optic tactum, but your decision making is in the forebrain, then it has to go to the optic tactum, come back out, go to the forebrain, go back to the optic tactum to send it down to the medulla to actually change your body. And that's what you're seeing in that picture, that video, is actually this delay that you should see in your animal. Well, But what if you don't see a delay? There's a couple reasons why you might not see a delay. One is they were already thinking about it. So we can see the time is 28 seconds. This is an emerald green tree skink. And he's climbing, he's mapping his territory through play. We see him playing, he stops. And he's looking around. It takes about 30 seconds for him to do that. So we can see it's 29 minutes. And so we can see that every time he stops for about 30 seconds, he goes on and he moves for even longer. Showing us that as he trains himself in his enclosure to map his enclosure through play, he actually is showing us that he is learning. And that learning behavior can actually be faster than just that. So even though it's not as big a delay as you might see in decision making that is not trained. So as they train themselves, decision making can get faster. I have a lot of questions on this. How does this affect the thalamus? I do not know. I do not know if it strengthens it, but in the forebrain it should have some strengthening of the connections the more he does this in the forebrain. But how it messes with the thalamus to create a faster reaction time is incredibly interesting, and I want to study it because I do not have an answer. Why am I showing this? I guess there's a double. So, the cerebellum. So this is a study that was done out of France. Some type of laboratory. The Pi laboratory is who did this. And they found species that actually burrow and, have reduced limbs or, limbs that don't exist like snakes. The actual cerebellum moves away from the optic tactile and is thinner than the cerebellums of quadrupeds. So the lizards that are arboreal, we can see that ones that do both is a little thicker, but yet the ones that are terrestrial are very thick. And so this is very fascinating. There's so many things I would like to learn on this, and when I write the book, we're going to ask a lot of questions that I don't have answers to. So the medulla, this is a very interesting one. Like I said, these slides, like these 4D models of these brains, are actually out of that lab. So out of France, they went from doing a 4D study on 40 different species and brains, and they only found that the cerebellum was mathematically. But here's the thing about this. As we look here, we can see that the actual medulla on the rainbow boa only comes down underneath the cerebellum, whereas the ball python comes down below the cerebellum before it peaks. You have to remember, there's only a limited number of space that they actually have in that brain cavity. So when you need more space, you kink. So the fact that this thing is kinking underneath the cerebellum, I find this is because that ball python buries itself. So when we look at the flying dragon versus the flying snake just kind of glides. Whereas the flying dragon actually stretched its skin. The snake only comes down underneath the cerebellum. The flying dragon comes down further than the cerebellum. What this is showing us is that species that have an over-tactile sensation actually have a bigger medulla percentile-wise that is coming down. You will see this over and over again. But why did that one study not find this? This is a hognose snake. This is the 3D model of the MRI. This is the actual MRI. And as we can see here on C, it's actually falling below the cerebellum because hognose buries itself. So it's over sensational tactileness. So that's what's causing that to grow. So what they found in this hognose study, I don't know how many of you have actually heard of this hognose study. And so the hognose, they had like 10 to 15 different hognoses that were born. They took the first year of its life, took half of them, and put in just paper towels into a tub. The other half, they actually added things to look at. They added, actual things to touch and feel, like actual, substrate. And so one of the things that you see is that it grew, the mid to hindbrain grew 10% in the ones that actually had the substrate and so on. And so the mid to hindbrain is the optic tactum, the medulla, and the cerebellum. So they actually saw 10% growth in those. And so what does that tell us? Can anybody tell me what that tells us? Why that other study didn't find this? Because it's individualized. And so when you're pulling them out of the wild, you don't know how they lived. It's really hard to define that because they can't tell you. It's hard enough to define that kind of stuff in humans. So this is why they didn't find it in that study, because they don't have that information. So the equation that they used was a little bit incomplete. It wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. So if you guys want to, I always talk about this as vertebrates. So let's see if a vertebrate might have that. So one of these is B is the A and B. So B is over here, and A is this one over here, and B is this one. Which one is the flying squirrel, and which one is the gray squirrel? Remember, the gray squirrel did not stretch its skin, whereas the flying squirrel actually stretched its skin. So we see the longer medulla. So the flying squirrel has a longer medulla than the gray squirrel, showing us that this is actually accurate for vertebrates, not just snakes and reptiles. Which is why this is very interesting to have these. We actually see a lot more in reptiles because of its linear and leanness of the brain. So the optic tactum is where, I've got the thermo down there. So when we look at blind sight, like I said, this is where your brain connects, and there's more going on than just that. We can't MRI them to figure out exactly where everything sits in that forebrain or that optic tactum, because every piece does multiple tasks. And every task has multiple regions that deals with. So this deals with sound, but so does the forebrain. Forebrain deals with sight, but so does this deal with sight. And so they have to build a connection between them. So it's very interesting. So this is also where we get thermoregulation. So what is something that we talked about in thermoregulation where they might actually burn themselves? Might lead to one reason why they would burn themselves. Think about that decision making and delay. Delaying in decision making could lead to them getting burned. Could be one reason. So this is the toe kick. I wish that thing was not on the screen. I can't figure out how to get it off. So as we look at this, I put in yellow. So like if you look at all the other numbers, we can see that this is the bottom one is the ball python. This bottom, second to bottom is the actual bearded dragon. The third one is a day gecko. The fourth one is the tokay gecko. They didn't have a 4D model of the tokay gecko or the day gecko, but the brains of the bearded dragon and the day gecko actually correlate pretty nicely overall. But why does this number right here in the yellow all of a sudden get short? And as we look at these 32 up here, so I circled them, this is where they're at. So that optic tactum in a tokay gecko is actually smaller in percentile than the actual bearded dragon, day gecko, or ball python. So this is why they get so defensive, because they can't dissect that information as fast or as as well as other reptiles might. This is why I always tell people you go in low and slow to give their brains more time, because it doesn't have the speed as the others do. And so the bearded dragon, third eye, is interesting. I got into a talk with Ryan McVeigh. I had to get on to him because he said that they should be able to see the actual spectrum with that. That is not correct. The octopus eye is actually very similar to our eye. There's a reason why you have to have the optic nerve to really see the way you see. So this little of information from a scale is not traveling underneath the forebrain into that optic nerve. What it's actually doing is going backwards straight into the optic tactile. And it's really nice. So this isn't going to tell him all that information, but it's enough information to give him some, whereabouts on predators. And so we see that it's going straight to the optic tactile. Well, we see this heat pits on pythons and boas, the labial heat pits. This is interesting because I always call it the mustache version. Now, when we look at this could actually have enough information close enough to the optic tactile to be able to send it there, straight there. So that's really cool. And it's like really fast compared to other snakes, whereas vipers are like 10% faster. They have like a 0.2 accuracy, like it's super accurate on a python or a viper's loreal pits. But that loreal pits is 2 dots in the front of the face that actually vibrate to heat. Now, how in the world can this viper send that signal to the optic tactile so much faster than the ball python? How is that possible with just 2 small pits in the front? It's not. What's actually happening, just like sound also does this. It goes through the nervous system. So it actually comes out their medulla. So when we look at instinctual thinking, so it's going to go straight to that optic tactile, and if they feel fear, it's going to go straight down to their medulla and move their body like that. They don't need to make that decision. That's why they have modeling. So one of the things that we see in the humans when it comes to empathy, we have modeling right here underneath our forebrain. And this is actually in the optic tactile. And yes, I cannot stand, I apologize for the vent here. I hate the reptilian brain quote that people have. It is ridiculous. Now, calling this a primal brain is fair. Calling this reptilian, well, the reptilian brain is only half the brain of an actual reptile. Your underneath is that second hump. The actual, when we go back and we look at this, we actually see that optic tactile, that's underneath your brain. That's the reptilian brain that they talk about. The instinctual brain. So the forebrain, the part that wrinkles that goes over that, is the first hump. So that first hump grew in humans and overtook the second hump. So they still have modeling. That modeling is what they need to survive. When they see everything running in the woods, they know they have to be scared and run with it. I can put an even bigger study together to kind of show you what you should see in something that has modeling, but I think that's a really big topic, and so we'll probably move on, but it's really interesting. And so when we look back at the nervous system here, that instantly happens. Whereas if it's a decision, it has to have a delay, or it's a learned behavior, it's actually a decision. So now we can understand where the instinctual happens. So it's so fast to move from the optic tactile to the medulla. Well, it also goes the opposite way, like I showed you before. So if it's moving through the medulla, like your muscle system, think about how fast your muscles do move. how fast their muscles can move. If the two dots in the loreal are moving through that, that would absolutely explain why this is 10% faster than the heat pits on the boa and the python, because it's going through the medulla, the muscle system, just like sound would. Now, I find the thalamus interesting. So is there any questions on the mid to hindbrain by anybody? I think that's a nice thing to kind of try to slow down a little bit. Is there any questions on the mid to hindbrain, the optic tactum? Because we can see how they connect together. So everything like that. So the thalamus actually has to move that information between all the stuff. This is highly unknown. Like I said, I would be very interested to see how Pidge, the bitch, my beardy, how she actually is so intelligent that she is actually a very quick learner. How is her thalamus impacted, if it's impacted at all? It would be very interesting to learn if that actually changes. Because we do see that in humans, when you grow your brain, it doesn't just grow your neurons. It grows the connections between them. People think size of the brain has a massive impact. It's actually part of the equation. It is not the full equation. The connections between the brains are the number one indicator of intelligence, not the size of the brain. The size of the brain is only a part of it. So the OL stalk is that piece in front. We think of the Tyrannosaurus rex. It's so interesting because it goes into the forebrain, and your forebrain holds your memory. So imagine a Tyrannosaurus rex opening its mouth to take in that air, almost like a suction, and just having so much of that optic or that OL stalk, the oral factory stalk. And just think about what it's memory, because that's why when you smell pumpkin pie, you think of Thanksgiving, a memory that you've had in the past or something. This is why that's happening, because it's directly in there. And you only have 1% of your brain dedicated to that. Whereas they have between 10 to plus 30. So that Tyrannosaurus rex eating a Triceratops might be going, this is like what Mama killed for me. And that's a legitimate, that's not like hypothetical. There is a T-Rex at some point in time thought that. Just simply because it goes to the memory. And we know memory can stick around for a long time. And so we see on, man, I wish that thing wasn't in the way. So they look dramatically different. So we have, I pushed the button. So we can see the rainbow boa here is a little thicker. The fire skink is thinner. And that's because the Jacob's organ. So how thick this actually pushes back on the forebrain of the snake. Whereas this does not. This actually drags the forebrain forward. And so we have just a ball and little chain over here for the beardy. So skinks and snakes have very high potential for actual the OL stock because of that Jacob's organ and the amount that they use it. So bearded dragons and iguanas are 10 to 15%. Skinks and tagus and monitors are like 20 to, I'd say 25%, where snakes are usually plus 30. And so we see the forebrain. We see this long shape here. It actually, not just, whereas we look at this fire snake, let's look at the fire snake real quick. It's actually kind of stretched that forebrain because of this and other factors that actually have to do with the forebrain. Whereas we have a long shape here. And like I said before, we can't MRI them the way we can a human. So we can't understand exactly where everything's at. But we know different pieces. Like your imagination is in the right side of your brain, whereas your memory retrieval is in the left side. So it's very fascinating. So whatever's down here in the lower extremities of this rainbow boa, that the tip of the lump, is going to take longer to get to that other side to connect than the parts over here. So whatever's over here should take longer. Oh man, I wish I could get that to close because I apologize since this is acting up. Let's see what we can do real quick.
It's a new computer.
Yeah, it's a new computer, but it's also, so this is, yeah, we'll go down to this one, forebrain one. No, you gotta move forward. Yeah, so I'm gonna put this right here. We should be able to see it there. See it right there? So this, look how just different this looks. In the desert horned viper. So imagine what's over here in the tips of it, having to take so much longer to get back over here to make any type of connection. So you could see why a skink and monitors might actually be faster thinkers, because whatever's on the edges would be quicker to get to the other side than a lot of snakes would. So it's very fascinating how that works. There's more here. There's a hypothesis that I have that the actual movement of the animal correlates with the shape of the forebrain. And that's because I think we're going to hit that here. Come on, I got to the wrong slide now. I apologize. Let me see. Come on, where are you at? All right. So, your basal ganglia sits underneath the forebrain. It's not going to be something you're going to see in MRIs, but we see that middle one is actually where humans have movement. Your movement is 3D modeled in your forebrain. But that basal ganglia actually does the movement. So as you're making your decisions to move, and it's 3D modeled right there in that blue and red spots, that's going to send a signal down to your basal ganglia, and that's going to kick it down to your optic tactum and down to your medulla to move in a decision-making capacity. And what's actually interesting is, so your optic tactum is going to actually move mainly from your medulla, your cerebellum, and your basal ganglia. This is where most advanced movement should come from when your optic tactum wants to do it instinctually. So where you yawn and I yawn, that's part of modeling. That's probably going to come out of the medulla. But yet, if this thing, so if a girl likes me, she might actually mimic my movements. So if I got my arm in the back of the chair, she's got her arm on the back of the chair, that's actually probably coming out of the basal ganglia. And so that's why that's underneath that brain, so it can actually move the muscles faster, because the faster the connection, and so that's why it's underneath. And this is fascinating. There's so much left for me to learn on this, but this is probably why the shape of the forebrain is the way it is that basal ganglia is sitting underneath, since it deals with movement. But that's the theory. This is fascinating. So we talk about the fact that your imagination is in the right side of your brain. Your memory retrieval is in the left side of your brain. So and we talked about before, there is no such thing as a vertebrate that we've ever seen that does not cross hemispheres. So when you actually imagine something, your eyes want to automatically dart to the left. Your eyes want to automatically dart to the right when you're trying to remember something, even though your memory is stored all over your forebrain. So this guy has been handled before. See how he finds something he's looking at, and then all of a sudden, for no reason, he switches eyes to look at it. And he's switching from his left eye memory to his right eye memory to his left eye imagination. So whatever he sees, he doesn't recognize. So he's thinking about it. And we need to change the way we look at imagination, because these things do have imagination. It should be defined as trying to understand the environment, the events happening in your environment around you. That's the original point of imagination. Now, this is interesting. This is where we get into tongue flicks. So this snake remembers. This is wanting food. Look at the tongue flick up. And then he's going into a couple of other thinkings. So that tongue flick up is memory. As the snake moves away from him, that tongue flick goes down more. Whereas when it goes towards him, that tongue flick goes up more. So you can go home and do this study on your own. So if it's memory, the snake tongue goes up. If it's imagination, that snake tongue goes down. We need to redefine creativity as being using both sides of your brain. If you're trying to make a piece of art, you're going to go, I'm using my imagination to imagine what I'm drawing, but I have to remember how to draw. So if you're really doing creativity, your eyes are most likely darting back and forth. So when this tongue clicks wildly, this is what's happening in their brain. They're using more of their brain power. So we can actually tell this, and we do believe that when they get cold, that slows down. And so it becomes even more defined. It's very fascinating. And so we can see the quick tongue flick is a reinforcement of what they see. I have seen this in my tagu, which is actually very hard to see. And I am trained to see nonverbal human communication. And it took me over a year with my bearded dragon, Convenzi, because they have that 260 view. So it's like when he tilts his head, is he looking up at the lights or is he looking down at the floor? So it took me a while to figure out their personalities, to figure out this. So when he would sit above my actual couch, I would throw my phone on the couch and he'd always tilt his head to the left. And so he doesn't know when I'm going on the couch. So how is he using his memory? He's wondering if this is a bug, most likely. Can he eat this? Is most likely what I'm imagining. So that really informed me, and like I said, it took me a year to figure this out. That this is imagination using in his mind. So I wanted to figure out, because it makes a lot of sense, and this is where size would matter. That the size of your forebrain may correlate with the size of your territory. Makes sense, right? Since that's your memory. But yet, how do I show this? What species has the biggest territory of any species? This is a Japanese study that was done. So the sea turtle, leatherback sea turtle, down here is the oceans, and all the currents in the center of the ocean is their territory. So that's the biggest range of anybody. But the biggest head here is the leatherback. Now the top one on the left is like an orange sea turtle, something like that. So we see the three humps like we see in all other reptiles. Like this is just simple. Like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So all of these look similar, but he actually rides the currents too. But he mainly lives in the shallows. All these guys mainly live in the shallows, except for this leatherback. And this looks like a pile of poo with a dinghy sticking out of it. Now, why might that be? We can look at his eyes. And his eyes are smaller than the other ones. Because he lives in that deep, dark ocean. There's nothing to map. These things map their territory. So therefore, these guys are mapping the coral. So they have like a lot of sight. This is this way because it's a blind species. So when you have a blind species, like the limbless skink or the European worm snake, we can see how flat that looks. This is how much your sight takes up of everything. So sound takes up so much less. Your magnetic field takes up so much less of your brain power. All that stuff. So that leatherback sea turtle doesn't need all this. So therefore, we can really understand that sight just takes up so much. And so the forebrain and optic tactum really just look like they are one and the same. But the optic tactum is just so small. It's really a fascinating thing. So, what do we think this is? I kind of want people to understand what this might look like. This is a veiled man. This is a model. It has the 3 humps, but it doesn't seem like anything really special. There's nothing in that brain that's really like outgoing because it's uromastics. So this is a very interesting study. The Cape dwarf chameleon out of Madagascar is about 13 centimeters. The Jackson chameleon is about 25 centimeters long. So why is their brain size basically the same? I don't have an answer to that. I do not know. But I find this fascinating. So this thing's half the size of a Jackson chameleon with the same size brain or bigger. I have no idea why. I think it's fascinating. So I am going to end up writing the book. I'm going to start next week. So we're going to go over in the book the different, evolution of the brain, introduction, which you kind of need to understand to read this book, because there's going to be so many parts. As we look at the individual parts, we got the cerebellum, and most of these are all designed kind of the same. Understanding the basics of the cerebellum or the thalamus or whatnot. But then going into more structural detail, like that frog's brain, where they dissected it, they were so detailed in it. So we're going to go over that for more college age stuff, and then experiments. So like we take the medulla study. So how does that affect their tactile sensation? So if they're over tactile in nature, what if we put a ball python versus a rainbow boa and let them escape an enclosure? And then we turn that enclosure around, see how they escape it. And then we get a completely acrylic, the same size enclosure, and let them escape that, and then spin that around. So we can understand their tactile nature, which one's faster, which one's using more tactile senses. Because just because it's being overused, I'm trying to think of the word, over dramatic in its deal, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to lose tactile sensation. They may have more tactile sensation, they may have less. I don't have an answer to that. But I think that's fascinating. And that's the kind of studies that I would like to add to this book, so somebody might go out there and actually do it, so we could actually understand these animals better. And then we'll go over theories in the mandibulus and theories in the cerebellums and things like that, because I still have a ton of questions. It's fascinating to listen to other people talk on these subjects where they just kind of throw their hands up. We don't know where this is at. It's like, yeah, we do, because these are vertebrates, just like every other vertebrate. How they fit into the regions is the question. Not that the region doesn't do it. The regions should not change. I seen one study where they showed the optic or the cerebral cortex in the optic tactum. Well, it's not in the optic tactums of humans. So if that's actually accurate, that changes the way we look at evolution. So the odds of that being correct is super, super slim to none. And so if that's actually correct, that person should deserve a Nobel Prize, changing the whole way we look at evolution. So we don't go into this going, oh, well, this region doesn't do this. No, we know what this region does. It's that connection between the regions that actually does this. So if this is a prey item, then they should have that instinctual system going like that. Whereas ours is so spherical, we have all this other information going on at the same time that's being collected all at the same time. That's just moving around just dramatically, like the lights in that ball is going on. Now we're very good at controlling it once we're adults, but yet they don't need that, because they need to get away as soon as they can. And it's fascinating when we think about how crocodiles and alligators and snakes might actually charge towards you. Well, they're charging towards you because safety's on that other side of you. And so when you look at it that way, they're using their basal ganglia, saying, we've already made this decision, this is where we're going. So their optic tactum's kicking in, and it's just moving them. They're not thinking about it anymore. It's just through their basal ganglia, just kicking it down. So it's very fascinating. So what kind of questions do we have? Any questions at all? Any comments? Anything? Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I've gotten something wrong? Because I would love to hear that. Because I'm not perfect. There's 3 reasons why I teach this. I want people to have questions. Because there's no way we have gone over even half of what these brains can truly do. 2, I want this to be a start for you guys to answer your own questions. 3, I want people to stop dissociating these animals out of the vertebrate kingdom. Emotions, as we saw with the Blackbeard, is out of the forebrain. Just like it's that anger is out of that forebrain, just like it is with you guys. It is not that different. It is different, but it is not that different. So do we have any questions?
On the study of the tongue flicking, that tells them what to do and stuff, do you know any difference? Like most snakes, of course, they just kind of stick their tongue out and back and like that. There's like a lot of the Chinese rat snakes have a habit of going up in the air, down, up, and then in.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
Does that have a difference?
I don't think it does. I think it's the amount that they are using it. So when it got colder, there was a young man at the symposium that I was talking to before at the Southwest Herp Society when I gave a talk earlier in April, and we were talking about he's seen it in the rattlesnakes, where this tongue went up, came in, went down, came in, went up, came in, went down, came in. And imagine that's just a slower version of creativity. And then when that guy came up and talked about the cottonmouths, and he was talking about the tongue flicks, and they were actually moving side to side. Because like when we look at a tagu, I've seen so many videos of a tagu moving side to side. That should be him using both his brain sides. So this, when it got colder, so they were talking like 18 C, so 18 Celsius. This snake was moving side to side so slowly, the tongue flick was slower, most likely because it was colder and the brain was harder to do, was harder to function because of the cold. And that young man was talking about a rattlesnake that did this. It was this slow. And we looked at the time that he filmed it was 2 a.m. So we know how cold 2 a.m. can get. So it's really showing us most likely, I can't tell you 100% sure, but most likely it is due to that cold and slowing down that brain. I would guarantee it's slowing down the brain, but are they doing it on purpose or is it actually slow? Because it may be like when you're trying to learn. It takes you longer to learn something new than it is to kind of add to your learning on something you actually already understand. So it may be something where it's like, I'm not used to this, but I'm pulling from both sides, like that. We could see it that way as well. And probably the answer is probably all the above. So it really just kind of depends. It just means that their brain is moving slower for some reason, is most likely the scenario. Still theoretical, but most likely it's going to be so hard for us to prove a lot of this stuff out in the way academia would want us to. But honestly, there's no reason to even think that it's wrong. I've seen it so often. You should go home, pick up the snake that you know you've held so many times before, and just see that tongue flick. I watched a guy with a king snake, and he's holding it like this at the show, and that tongue is just going. As soon as I walk over, the tongue, and it's just because he doesn't know me. But I'm like, that snake knows you. He's like, yeah, I hold it all the time. It's just that memory versus imagination, that creativity, trying to connect both sides so it can make sense of its world. And it makes sense that they would. We saw with that cottonmouth, he was talking about this thing makes decision on how it bites the actual deal. We've seen in mating, the females sometimes won't go for the brood. Says, no, I will fight you back. But that male that just kind of strolls up all nice and easy, almost like it models, is more likely to model her behavior, probably has a better chance with her. She feels more comfortable with it. They're actually making that decision. And it's so interesting to see that in their behavior, because most people think these are non-emotional, non-thinking. I've got Cuban Idanoles. The big one I've got that I've had for a couple of years does not want anything to do with me, won't let me touch him. It's the scariest lizard, one of the weakest bites, because his jaw just opens up like that and he'll twist around and bite. But yet I've got two young ones, and I actually fixed one of their eyes. He will come up and eat out of my hands while the other one won't, because he had a positive reaction to me. So to me, I'm not a negative like the other one is. It's very fascinating. Lori Torini once asked a question: do these animals see us as a whole or individual parts? She's very well known for training, for target training snakes, is her big thing. And it's a great question. My Savannah monitors are love and hate. Love is a male who has a bad arm since birth, so he's handicapped. Whereas my Savannah monitor Hate does not. She was a runt. Hate will go after my hands, but she won't go after me. Whereas Love, if he's cold, will let me hold him. But when he's warm, I try to pick him up, and he turns around and bit me on the nipple. But yet, when we're at the park, all he does is try to run away from me. Just honestly, just runs and runs. Whereas Hate's just like, you got too close, I'll tail whip, let you know you're too close. Now she just picks her up, puts her on my arm, and we go on our way. She'll climb in the bag, all that stuff, because that's what's comfortable for them. And so what I've learned from them, and I think this is actually cool that we could turn this into a human study. He's handicapped. So can handicapped people not dissociate? Because she's dissociated. And there's so many ways to do that in the brain. If they can associate a target with something, then they can disassociate. So she's disassociated my hands. And the way your memories are stored, it could be the fact that she's got me over here and her food is over here, or they could be super close. And so when she thinks of this, she also thinks of my hands. But when she thinks of my hands, she's going to think of food as well. But yet if she thinks of me, she's not thinking of food because they're not connected. Or she might even have a duplicate hands over here next to the food, and then me over here. So either way, and both of those are probably correct. It just depends on the animal, the individual, how their brain is functioning. So probably both of those are correct, and they're probably actually using it, because that's how your memories would work. That's how your stuff would work in your brains. There's no reason for them not to work the same way. Zero reasons why. So that's probably exactly what's happening. And probably all of those are correct. So people and reptiles and just vertebrates in general that are normal, that are not handicapped, probably are easier to dissociate from reality and other factors than are handicapped people. And I would love to do that study with humans. I think that would be fascinating. And to do it from Savannah monitors, of all things. Like, who would thought? Anybody else have any questions?
You're talking about cold, snakes that are cold. Have any studies been done comparing how they behave, how they react between cold snakes and snakes that are actually warm?
That Cottonmouth study was the only one that I've really known, but everybody I've ever heard of says that they do get slower, and it makes sense. They would get slower, blood flow slows down. But that Cottonmouth was very interesting because it's still sensory. I was talking to a herpetologist on it at WashU, a herpetology guy, and we were talking about it, and he thought that the cold would speed up the sense. No, it would actually slow down. The heat would actually make these smell move faster with the stuff. It's very, very interesting. So, is it harder for that smell to get to them? There's so many other factors to go into that as well. But yeah, I can't see why not. And I guarantee you there's studies out there you can find with cold. I haven't done any of those. I haven't seen it. But I mean, I've always been annoyed because I've seen my bearded dragons at 70 degrees make decisions still. But like the snakes, it's probably slower decisions. But they're still making decisions. So when is that cold cutoff? I've always wondered. That's my question. When is that cold cutoff from when it goes from they can still use their brains to they're done? They're just, everything just stops. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I think it's fascinating. So I have thought about it. So it's such an interesting question. Anybody else?
Yeah, to finish your book, you're going to do your own personal studies to find out some of your theories to get concrete answers?
Well, I can. My issue is I don't have time or money.
All right.
I'm scraping by just to get this written. And there's so much information we already have. And how much of this has anybody actually known about or thought about before I talk about it? Has anybody thought about any of this before this? This is, but yet it makes sense, right? Who thinks this doesn't make? I would love to hear from them, because something I've done before. So I talked about the tilting in the brain being about, most likely it's actually sitting up. The animals that sit up, the forebrain seems to tilt. Probably goes back to that basal ganglia being 3D modeled. So therefore it's 3D modeling into the forebrain, and because the leanness of their brain is probably showing more of that than you might find in other vertebrates. But yet, I'm trying to think what was the question? I literally just had a brain fart there.
Oh, I just wonder how many of these, your theories that you were going to try to conclude on yourself to find.
Yeah, that was because I don't have, I don't feel like killing reptiles either. That hognose study, that kind of breaks your heart that they had to put them down. But we got so much information off of that wasn't in other studies, and so it sucks. I interviewed Jonathan Losos, evolutionary biologist out of WashU. He put the anoles on the island and figured out within 2 generations their legs grew and shrank according to how many trees they had and the hurricanes. So the more trees they had, they would grow so they could grip on the trees and hold. Otherwise they would shrink because it was grasslands and they would move faster on the grass within 2 generations. And the hognose study shows you how fast. I didn't know that it would happen that fast, that growth. Within 1 year, it was 10% more. And so we can really see the individualized, the evolution happens so fast, way faster than most people can imagine. In just 2 generations. And I asked him, what was the ethics of putting them on that island? We tell people not to do that now. And he's like, well, it was back in the 80s, and all those have gotten washed off the island by now. But it's, so now all those are dead. So I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. So like I said, I think about Pitch. And when she goes, wanting to cut open her brain to see the thalamus and how that actually, because her forebrain is probably thicker than a lot of other bearded brains because of that connections, because of how fast she thinks. But does the thalamus? So one thing about monitors I would love to see with the thalamus. So does the thalamus go in between more of the optic tactum and the forebrain? We could do that study without killing them. But you really have to have an MRI and people that are looking for it. Because most people are focused on everything else other than the thalamus. But the thalamus is one of the most important things. So trying to find studies, be it, I don't have the money to do it.
So why can you not do an MRI on a reptile?
You can do an MRI, but as we look here, see how these images kind of look. Whereas we may mainly think of MRIs as being able to see these different parts of our brain. See how this lights up and this lights up. So if I showed you a picture of your wife or your girlfriend, your brain's going to light up differently if I show you your bully from college, you know. And so we can't do that with them because they have to be sedated. That's the biggest issue with why we cannot go, oh, well, this is automatically in this exact spot in this region. We know it's in the region. And as we saw through the eyes, they should be on the same side of the brain. But we also know when humans lose parts of their brain, it can switch sides. Like, so if there's people that have lost half their brain and still completely function because it moved. So how much moves, how much doesn't move, we see with the, I don't want to go in and try to figure out exactly where every spot of that optic tactum does what with the tokay gecko, simply because that could be from multiple parts of that optic tactum. Could be small, so it actually shrinks it. Or it could be one thing missing out of it that changes it. So just because we find the imagination, like where they might be empathy, the way we see empathy, that's out of your forebrain, because it's back here in your forebrain also is the putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. That's actually neuroscience. So and that goes back to, oh, well, it's part of your imagination. You're trying to make sense of the environments, the events happening around you by putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So where does that fit in their forebrain? Like I said, when we were talking about this, their actual forebrains here, what lies right here at the bottom? What lies right here in that corner of that lung shape? I don't know. And I don't know of a way for us to truly find that out. Because whatever's there is going to take longer to get to that other side. So it has a massive impact. But yet, what is it? We cannot MRI them the way we can a human. And in the forebrain, it's so almost uniform looking, and yet all the pieces are so dramatically different. There's so many pieces to it. Sound is also dissected there. Friggin' your vision, your decision making, your imagination, part of the thermoregulation's there, part of everything is there. But how does it fit in? What shrinks, what grows? Does the box turtle that needs less heat than that, does it have smaller, different parts? I really don't know. But it's there. We know it's there. We know it's in the foreground. We just can't tell you exactly where and how it shapes. Because does it shape differently? Does the parts of that horned dragon, that horned desert viper, I find this interesting. Because when we look at this, so when we think about the human, when we think about movement, we see this going over from the top to the middle of the brain for our movement. Well, most likely this does it here as well. Most likely. Does it? It might go this way. Most likely it goes this way. But how does this one work? Does it go this way? And so when we look at it like that too, if this does go this way, is the horned desert viper seeing its movement as wider than a viper or a boa or python does? Does it see its movement as just being this much wider range? Because it's 3D model, just like ours is. So I can't remember if it's feet up top or head, but at the bottom it's head or feet. So all your parts are literally 3D modeled into your brain, into that. There should be exactly the same way. But how does that work in there? Does it go across long ways for the viper and go across long ways this way? How does that work? I don't know. But I find it incredibly fascinating to think that most likely this horned viper thinks of its movements as wider than a python would. And that makes perfect sense. You just never think about these animals actually thinking about how they move themselves. But they would. If that, like they did that study where they proved that the Cottonmouth was actually was shooting its venom into the mice through the head. No matter how you pushed or pulled that mouse, it aimed for that head. It deliberately did that on purpose. So they are making that decision like that. So the way they move is also a decision. And like I was explaining to him, every time I go through this and think about how their brains compared to their movements, we look at this guy. If you actually look at D, it kind of looks like a long-head swallow. If you kind of look at A and D, it looks like the long head kind of, or a balloon, swallowed the forebrain of that viper. Kind of, is what it kind of looks like to me. Well, a corn snake, or a hognose snake, does both. It moves like the viper, and it moves like the actual python. But yet, that's where I was getting at. How does this see it? How do we as humans see it? So when I was talking about sitting up, that's where I was going with that. So I sent out a picture of my fighter skink. And as we look at the forebrains, that fighter skink tilts down. And I talked about the fact that I believe that tilting down, see how more it tilts down than the rainbow boa? Probably because that fighter skink sits up. So I have a picture of my fighter skink coming out of the ground and attaching. This is sitting up, but how does somebody else see it? Is somebody else going to say, no, that's not sitting up? So I sent that picture out to other people and asked them, and I did get people back where they're like, I don't know, I'm not for sure if that's sitting up, or other people like that. So it's weird. You almost have to understand how other people see it as well. This is where I get into a lot of the issues with modeling, because I've studied it. I know how humans model from each other. So one way, like if somebody's cold, or the crossing of the arms like this is usually I'm uncomfortable. It could be from cold. It could be from a lot of things. So if you do this and do this, people will stop. Like they'll do it themselves because they're just modeling. It's just that part of their empathy. But you can also actually just reach up, and sometimes if they're comfortable with you, you can reach up and just pull down their arms. And it should make them more comfortable, weirdly enough, because their brain is attached to being uncomfortable when they're like this. So this is uncomfortable. So my savannah monitor, Love, curls his tail. Most monitors will curl their tail when they're uncomfortable. So what is one thing that I might do to make him comfortable? Uncurl that tail. But how does other people see that? How does other people see that as modeling? So I've sent pictures out. I had emerald swifts that were sitting exactly the same. I walk into the room behind them, accidentally scared this one. It jumps, the other one jumped exactly the same way. But there was a picture of the Missouri collared lizards standing exactly the same. Well, he's wanting to mate with that girl. And if she ran off, he would run off exactly the same. If she was scared, he would jump. I guarantee it. Because he's modeling. But not everybody sees it that way. A lot of people are like, well, they're just standing. And that's a fair assessment. But also saying that they're not modeling is not fair. Saying that it could be either or is fair. And so it's really fascinating to kind of try to figure out what other people are thinking about these subjects. Because if you don't understand how somebody else sees it, it's really a problem. So if I were to come back, if you guys would like, I would love to give a presentation where I'm going to show you videos of like what the FBI would do with modeling. So how they would see a couple in a cafe or something. How that works with modeling, how they model each other, how that works. And then we could actually look at like meerkats and see if that modeling, because that's what it's about. It's about fear and lust, basically, is really where those two things kind of come into play. And then we could actually look at the collared lizards. We could look at the curly-tailed lizards. I seen 2 pythons, and I got a lot of feedback from that this is not correct, and you're seeing too much. Where one was actually in the exact shape, except for its tail, where the smaller one, like, it was spread out, it had this curve going up, like you could literally draw the line to the tail, and then draw the male line, exactly the same line. You would overlap them. And what's interesting about snakes in that modeling, they don't close their eyes, so that information is still going through when they sleep. So if his focus is on her, he's going to model her. Is there a potential that that wasn't modeling? Yes. One reason that I would actually concur that it's more modeling is because he can't see the tail, and the tails are not the same. But yet, other people are like, well, you can't say that, you can't say that. So I need to understand how other people see this as well. So really go out here and say, okay, so if I did bring in like the FBI's analysis stuff on modeling, and we can transfer that over to see how animals are, I would love to show that to people. So we can actually get a better understanding as a group on what this should look like. Does that make sense?
Fair enough.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating to try to figure out how other people see this stuff.
Right.
But yet, all this is correct. If you can prove this wrong, I want to hear from you. I really do. I'm not going to get mad at you all. I will cheer you on as you win a Nobel Prize for changing the way we look at freaking evolution. Because that's what you would have to prove a lot of this wrong. This is why I stick with this basic stuff and not a lot of the theoretical stuff for these talks. Because this is the basics. And so, like I said, I will literally cheer you on. I will not argue like, oh, you proved me wrong, how dare you? I will, oh my God, dude, you did it. Oh my God, let's go get you a Nobel Prize. Because that's literally what you would get for actually figuring out if these were actually wrong. Because it would change everything the way we look at evolution.
Would you say, why didn't I think of it?
Yeah, I love the lady in I was explaining some of this stuff to her, and she goes, yeah, why would they not? Yeah, why would they not? That doesn't make any sense. They would not have that. I love that attitude, but I also have to realize that there's other people who are not going to have that attitude. And so